Welcome to Midlife Matters. I'm Marie, and each week I'm joined by my friends Julie and Mindy to talk about all the topics keeping women in the middle years up at night. Today we're talking about relationships. Join us as we discuss ways we're changing and learning to improve our relationships with family and friends. Let's get started. Listeners, today we're talking about relationships, and there are so many different kinds of relationships in our lives, and it seems like we're always changing and learning things that hopefully improve our relationships and make us better friends and family members. And Julie just read an interesting article that's going to be the springboard for today's discussion, and the title is Quick to Listen, Slow to Therapy Speak. So Julie, can you give us a little background on this and what about it struck your fancy?
Well, I'm always saving articles and thinking, I think we could talk about this. So I remembered it and pulled it back up. It was from Christianity Today, May 22nd. It said using terms like trauma, abuse, and toxic too flippantly has consequences for our relationships. So that immediately piqued my interest. And so they call that therapy speak. Like these terms that were once confined to like very clinical settings are now just floating around out there, like everybody's an armchair psychologist, using these terms. And it's just everywhere. Like a difficult roommate is toxic, or any kind of argument is abuse, or every ex-boyfriend is a narcissist, and just kind of normal everyday stress is trauma. And not to say that those are very real words. And people do experience those, but just how maybe the overuse of those words can kind of minimize the more severe forms of trauma and abuse, So I just thought that would be an interesting topic to discuss, because I don't know about you guys, but on my social media feed, I think I might have looked up narcissist once, and I have all these little things suggested for me, like 5 questions to ask if you're married to a narcissist, or, do you have a toxic roommate? It's like these little questionnaires and tips, and it's like, who is putting this out?
Right.
My level of seeing these articles shared and seeing things shared, there's so many memes and things like that for narcissism, toxicity, that I'm like, I'm thinking like, wow, I've never thought about all these things. I had no idea that there were so many narcissists around me. So many toxic relationships, and then, to hear them described, like when you actually hear somebody like talking about it, that it sounds, I'm sorry, it can sound trivial sometimes. Like it's literally just a little conflict in a little relationship that kind of needs to be worked through. And so I'm like, oh, okay. So you're having relationship problems.
Right.
Yeah, I heard somebody say, like, if everybody has 5 toxic people in their inner circle, then the definition of toxic is definitely not what we used to think about. That's just become like, who has brown hair, who has blonde hair, who's toxic, who's,
right.
The definition has definitely changed.
I think this may be a generational thing. We're kind of like the older generation where we kind of sit back and we're like, what is that really toxic? Because in our minds, so few things were really labeled toxic or even trauma. Like I might hear a story from an older person and I'd be like, oh my goodness, that had to have affected you your whole entire life. And they've never even mentioned it. And when I mention it, they're like, oh, well, we moved on. Like, I just don't think the people even labeled and identified things, even real traumatic things.
Right.
Up until that's a generation or so ago.
Well, you think about World War II veterans, some of those boys were under 18 years old, left their home, went and fought and saw horrific things. And you're right. They probably should be talking about it.
Yeah.
Well, I know, I totally agree about generationally speaking, because anytime you're with older women and younger women, the conversations are just very different. And so it almost seems to me that their pain threshold was really high. They almost could handle more, by going through more, by dealing with more, by maybe not having a voice. And I'm not saying this is healthy necessarily, also, this other side of the pendulum is that, maybe a mom with young kids is like, oh, I really need like a 3-day vacation by myself. Like I can't handle being with my kids anymore. And this is just, I'm going to need some me time. Well, that concept of me time is laughed at by the older generations. And I do see myself falling somewhere in the middle. Like, I'm like, actually, it's really healthy to take notice if you're completely stressed out. And also don't be a martyr. Like, I think that there are just these trigger words that, the generations can kind of have conflict when it's good for us to have like a mutual respect for what people have gone through and also try to find a healthy balance for what you're going through. But again, these words are just a lot more used now.
Well, and again, the point of the article, I think, is not to say, oh, get over it. That really wasn't abuse. Like, there is legitimate abuse. There is legitimate neglect and childhood traumatic events. It's really not focusing on that. It's just kind of at the end of the article, it talks about, as Christians, are we losing opportunities to love people well and make some sacrifices for people that are just maybe hard to live with or annoying or, and that the overuse of these terms is what we're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say, like, well, why are we talking about this as midlife women? But I really like your point that as midlife women, we really are a bridge. I'm a bridge between my young adults and my parents. Those are two completely different generations. They deal with events in two different ways and would describe a trauma in completely different terms, would label something as trauma in different ways. My parents wouldn't even really understand this younger generation saying that their friend is toxic or that boyfriend is a narcissist. Like, they wouldn't even understand. Right. I don't totally understand it. I have to go and look up the definition. But like, I think we're kind of like a bridge. Like we say, like, whereas like maybe the older generation might scoff it off, we're like, okay, well, this is a real experience for them. So let me go and look up what they're meaning by this and be able to explain it so that I can talk with them about that. In my life, I have to understand both sides.
Yeah. And the good part of all this is that, as I think everybody would agree, that mental health has declined in the last 4 or 5 years, that more people are talking about it and reaching out for help and searching for help. And it's been destigmatized so that people feel free to talk about it. So those are all good things. It's just at the same time, it's put a lot of clinical terminology in people's mouths that maybe aren't trained to use it.
Right. I was going to say that I'm glad you brought that up. That term mental health is a lot more used now, and it's acceptable. And I think it's, can be very healthy to look at your mental health. I mean, it just sounds very clinical to say that. And so I know that I hear the younger generation say things like, I need to take a social media break for my mental health. And I'm like, I love that, but I would never hear an older person say that necessarily. But I do think taking this self inventory is very good and can be very humbling. And so I'm excited to talk about this because one of the things that the article pointed out, which I thought was very wise, it's really kind of these words. It's the difference between self-preservation and emotional maturity. And so that bridge was kind of the catalyst for my thoughts about this topic is, am I trying to just preserve myself, or am I actually allowing myself to be humble and emotionally mature with a relationship with maybe a difficult person?
Through difficult relationships, that's where we mature, when you are in hard situations.
Right. Like sometimes I choose to be offended. Like I make a conscious choice to go ahead and let somebody offend me because I love them, or I kind of balance and weigh the situation or maybe my relationship with that person. And I'm willing to be offended. And I know that I'm just going to have to forgive. And so some relationships are like that, whether it be family or friends. There's certain pitfalls that we each have maybe ruts that we fall into with a particular person. And I know I'm the same way. And it takes constant, I'll say, evaluation, and not so much that I'm trying to elevate my own self, but almost that I'm trying to have a real view of myself. Like I want to genuinely see, what am I doing that's causing maybe the same reaction in a person. And so I do want to emotionally mature, and I want to be praying over those relationships, because it's too easy to fall into a rut or a similar dialogue. Maybe that's not healthy.
Yeah, I thought about 1 Peter 4:8 when you were saying that. It says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. Again, we're not talking abuse, neglect,
right.
But little offenses and hurts. Sometimes you just keep your mouth shut, I mean, that's a choice that we all have. Learning when to do that and when to hash it out. Like, those are just things you learn in relationship with people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I know that these words are being used more regularly. Have you personally noticed yourself using them more regularly?
I'll say yes, because they're like trigger words. I know that I kind of flippantly use the word toxic, maybe like with my kids. I'm like, don't be so toxic, and it's kind of like a funny thing, but also it's just kind of relevant conversation in this day and age. And then the other thing is, I know that after our last move, thankfully that was 3 years ago, I remember after we first moved in, it was the first time I really kind of considered the word trauma. And I just after days of being in my new home and kind of coming off of the move, I was like, I feel like I've been traumatized. There was an article I read about children, and it listed different types of trauma, and moving was one of those things listed. And so at that point, I kind of assigned that label to moving a lot really being kind of a trauma. And at the same time, I don't want to use that word, because honestly, it's hard, but I hate to even add that, situation, because I almost think it makes it bigger in some ways, than it really is. And in other ways, it makes it understandable, and it makes you pay attention and pray and work through it. So I think you could kind of go either way with that. But yeah, those are words that are in my vocabulary a little bit more.
I was thinking about the word trauma. I'm hesitant to use the word trauma because I feel like there maybe should be more words than just trauma, because I feel like trauma should be reserved for really terrible things. Like we watched Band of Brothers recently, for Band of Brothers type things. Like, I'm not experiencing anything like that. And so I don't want to say that my thing is on the level of genuine trauma that other people. Sometimes I'll read a story about something someone has gone through, and I'm like, I seriously have 0 things in life to ever complain about again. Like, I don't want to, I feel like I shouldn't use the same language that I would use to describe that other thing. And it's not enough to me to say, oh, we all have our traumas. No, we really don't all have our traumas. Some people have real traumas, and I don't know what the trauma with a capital T, and some people have trauma with a lowercase t. Maybe that, I don't know, there's not enough words in the English language maybe to describe things.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's really true, because I was thinking about this, that even what I've been through with John passing away and, dying of cancer, and it was a pretty horrific cancer at the end, I wouldn't classify that as trauma. And that may sound really bad, but, but like you said, Marie, there has to be some room at the top for like the Holocaust survivors. Like if I take up as this is the worst trauma possible, then there's nothing left for, and there is a lot worse. There is a lot worse out there. And I know your trauma is your trauma, and and it's bad to you, but there's still worse. I mean, there still is worse. So I just have never considered what I went through as trauma. I mean, I've never used that word. Now, there's also the distinction of things can be traumatic. And I think that feels like a lesser down on the scale a little bit, like it has some traumatic characteristics, but I don't just classify it as a huge trauma in my life. The word that I hear thrown around more is probably narcissist. I mean, that word is just everywhere. And there was someone in my life that I used to know that a lot of people would throw that word out about this person. And so I did kind of just start to accept that, like, well, it has to be true if everybody says that. But then I started to reevaluate and thought, no, maybe they're just kind of fallen into this trap of using that word. There's not been a diagnosis. I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, it could be true, but I don't know. None of us are doctors. So, So, I thought, I might need to be careful about that.
Right.
Yeah.
I know, seeing like you might be married to a narcissist, or your friend might be a narcissist list. Like I see those on social media. And I mean, at any one time, one of those things could relate to me if I've not been a good friend.
I know, like if you've ever,
I'm like, oh, am I? Like,
like if you've ever manipulated someone or been selfish, does that mean, would you be a narcissist? Like, no, not necessarily. And, I read somewhere that a therapist, it takes a very long time to make a diagnosis of. That's not an easy thing. It's not a checklist. Like, okay, you've got 3 of these 4 traits, or you've ever done this, then that makes you that. Diagnosis is much more nuanced than that, and so it is a bit unfair. I certainly don't want to be diagnosed by my peers.
Probably because I click on a lot of these, hoping to avoid ever being classified as this. But I see a lot of reels on toxic mother-in-laws, and like. I don't even think that these mother-in-laws are toxic. They might be overbearing. They might be insensitive. They might be going through menopause and having an angry phase. They might it might be a stage of life. Like, I don't think they're toxic. I think they're probably just normal people seeing things from their perspective, not considering a younger person's perspective, I don't know. I think in general, there cannot be this many toxic mother-in-laws in the world. Literally.
Right.
I see one every time I get on Instagram. Yeah. I think sometimes things that we used to just call overbearing or annoying or insensitive or, oh, I got to deal with that again. Or, now we're like, toxic, cut them out. Big, cross your fingers in front of them. Like, I don't know. I think it might be a little overused. Like, I think if anyone looked at themselves, myself included, and we read a list of what makes a relationship toxic, we'd probably do some of those things sometimes because we're all sinful.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And Marie, would you share that statistic that you gave to Julie and I about the number of relationships?
Oh, yeah. My daughter sent me this statistic that she read in an article and wanted to talk about it because she was so shocked by it. It said 26% of millennials are estranged from at least one parent. That's really sad. That's a quarter of the millennials. I know that people can be estranged from a parent for a good reason. I know there are some out there, but I feel like they should be the rare circumstance, not a quarter. I don't know.
Yeah, that seems high.
And it's very scary being on the other side now, being a parent with kids that are old enough to just cut you off. That I don't think used to be a fear of older generations. That their kids were just going to cut them off and never speak to them again. Now we have to live with that fear, and it changes relationships. And I'm not saying that there's not some good things that come out of being more careful with each other, but it's not all good things that come out of that. I just read this little thing that I took a screenshot of this week. 7 signs you have the mama you need. Number 1, she annoys you at time. Okay, she annoys you at times. That's the number 1 characteristic of a sign that you have the mama you need. That just used to be a badge of honor. Your mother was annoying. You know why she was annoying? Because she cared. She cared enough to push you. She cared enough to check in on you. She
be in your
cared enough
business.
To tell you advice that you didn't want to hear. She told you, she cared. Who else is doing that for you? Right, if you're cutting your mother off because she does that, you're missing out.
Right.
No one else is going to love you that much.
Right. She's the only one that really cares.
Yeah. So I don't know. I just thought that was very interesting. And I think it was made by a millennial. So obviously this person has maybe tried to change the conversation. But yeah, like in general, older generations were kind of annoying to younger generations in a good way. It's like family. You can't live with them. You can't live without them.
Yeah.
Like all those sayings are true for a reason.
Yeah. You take the good with the bad,
Right. Well, that's why I think it's so actually very healthy to talk about it and laugh about it. Like we did the whole episode, what is it, The Leighton Show or whatever, about the teenage texts.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That I think that is good to talk about and laugh about, because it helps parents handle teenagers in a more lighthearted way. Things don't build to a degree that you're just like, my kid is terrible. This is a terrible season, but you actually can find the joy in it. But I think the same thing with the girl that does the Boomer Mom.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
I appreciate that she brings to light some things, that generational differences, and she's actually self-aware about even her generation. She's a young mom. She's laughing about her boomer mom. And those are very healthy ways to handle the generational differences of language, how you respond to things, how even you travel because you do things differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she is so good at that. I forget sometimes that she's not the mom. Do you guys, when you're watching her, I think, I forget that she's the daughter.
But don't you catch that she loves her mom? Like she's
sure.
totally like making fun of these generational differences. But in that, there's actually a love, and she's thrilled to death that her mom's in her life.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and Marie and I were talking about this yesterday on a walk, like, not that we go to TV for like our role models, but there were a lot of TV shows that we've all talked about here, like The Middle and some others in The Cosby Show and stuff, that families didn't always get along and the teens got in trouble and the parents were annoying. But by the end of the show, you knew they loved each other.
Right.
And like Everybody Loves Raymond. Like, I mean, that's the worst mother-in-law in the world.
She is hilarious.
And I know it's TV, it's fiction, but I mean, I still think, TV represents real life sometimes, that I think people were just expected to take the good with the bad and deal with difficult people at a different, at a former time.
It's messy. It's not perfect. There's a lot of forgiveness. There's a lot of offenses. And then there's a lot of love.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyways, but let's talk a little bit about how relationships are bound to have conflict, but what are some healthy ways to navigate those? I mean, I think it goes without saying, talking and arguing, but I just wanted to share an example from my own life. And I don't think my daughter would mind me sharing this. And this is kind of humbling for me. I was being too indulgent with my grandchildren. When they were over, I was just afraid to discipline them, afraid to say no. Whatever they asked for, I gave them. Even after Abigail had said, no, they can't have that, then I would be like, oh, well, how about this snack instead? Or, oh, it's just one day. Or, oh, Pepper, ask mommy again. Or, just like not. And I know these things on paper. Respect the mother's authority. Always go, don't. I know those things on paper, but in real life, I just was unable to discipline my grandchildren and unable to draw any boundary lines. Like whatever they wanted, I just wanted to give. And Abigail would be like, Mom, that's never how you treated us. I don't understand why you're doing that with the grandchildren. I'd be like, I don't know. It's like something comes over me. And it really got to a point where one day she got upset and went home mad. I could tell mad. And I felt terrible. And then she called and we had to talk about it. And I say this because I feel like a lot of what I was doing is given as examples in toxic mother-in-law videos of like why to cut your mother-in-law off. Like they would have already cut me off. Like I was making mistakes, okay?
Right.
But I appreciated that Abigail called me out and said like, Mom, I can't come over and enjoy myself if you can't say no to Pepper and Chapel. Like when I tell them no about something, I don't need you to make a face behind my back or run and comfort them or offer them something different. I need you to just go about what you were doing and let me discipline. And I need you, like if you said no, they can't have a snack and then they cry about it and then you get out a snack, well, that's just stressful. It's not causing the family group dynamics to go well. And I totally know that stuff on paper. And I appreciated her saying that. I apologized. I've tried to do so much better at disciplining, not even disciplining, but just respecting her discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying that because I'm so glad that she just talked about it with me. Like we talked about it. And even the other day, the girls were over and Pepper said, can I take this book home? And I said, no, let's leave this book here because then when you come over, we have it to read. And then she started to cry. And I was just about ready to say, oh, okay, if you want to take it home. And Abigail goes, Mom, stay strong. So,
wow.
You know, it's really hard for me to see Pepper cry. And she cried for about 1 second. Like, you know, I mean, maybe 20 seconds, you know, and then I distracted her with something else to talk about on the way out to the car. And she was okay without that book. But it was just like, I needed Abigail to say, and we needed to talk about that family conflict. And I said why I was probably doing that, and she understood why I was doing it, and I understood why that upset her, and I've tried to do better, and she's tried to understand that I'm learning. These are my first grandchildren, and I'm going to make mistakes. And so I felt like it was a really good opportunity to just talk out instead of letting it build and resentment, and the fact that I was willing to take a look at myself and be honest that, yeah, I am doing that. I need to do better.
Yeah, and I think that's the danger of like kind of using these words too flippantly or jumping to these diagnoses is like it just makes it easier to shut people out quickly because, you know, if you've been labeled toxic or whatever, it just legitimizes your response. Like, well, I can't go over there anymore. I can't be around her. And it's like, are you setting boundaries or are you just avoiding confrontation? You know, it seems like it's the easy fix. Just to not choose to be around them. And how sad that would be, you know, like, and now, you know, Abigail can probably just give you the look. And after you've had the conversation, you know what's behind all that. And it's probably easier to do the right thing.
I really appreciate that you shared that, Marie, and that you were vulnerable because I imagine that probably affects a lot of listeners. I even remember my own mom when one of the kids was a newborn and I was trying to like train them, like sleep train them, and you have to let them cry a little bit. My mom told me later, she said, I had to leave the room. I could not sit there and listen to that baby cry. And see, as a mom, I was like, I've got to train this kid. Like, I've got to survive the night. My mom said, like, it took everything in me. Finally, I had to leave the room because I couldn't take it. I can't take that kid, you know, the baby crying. But, you know, how healthy to be able to talk through conflict using words, not just texting. You know, I feel like so much is lost with texting. And if you're trying to work through a conflict, actually, if you're apart, calling on the phone, FaceTiming, or coming in person to talk through that. Because I just even think about like when our kids are little, we try to teach them conflict resolution. We sit them down and give them opportunities to speak and tell how they were hurt by the other person. And then they have to be quiet, and then they have to listen to how the other person feels and why they were hurt. And somehow you're able to navigate this conflict resolution with children. Somehow we lose this as adults. I think it's harder to have that, even though we've tried. I mean, I certainly tried to model it in my home, but I have a hard time doing it sometimes.
I'm not sure if there's a generational difference too about thinking that if a relationship is good, it'll be conflict free.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I have a friend who's I call her my young friend because she's in her 20s. And she was in a relationship and it you know, it broke off. And the reason was after like 3 or 4 months, they had a big fight. And the guy said that told him that it wasn't meant to be. He said, because we had this disagreement. And it wasn't like a disagreement over like a moral issue or like we just, it was just like, we can't fight. And this friend of mine is very emotionally mature and very much a good communicator and wants everything out in the open. And she saw the fight as like a great opportunity to learn about him and to she was actually kind of energized by it. This is how John was, like energized by it because we can change and work things and make it better, and I just thought that was really eye-opening, that's because she thought, how is he ever going to find anybody, like you're not.
Right.
And I think that's another detrimental thing is if you're just kind of cut people out when things get hard, you're just going to be in a pattern of that. That's just going to repeat. It has to, and that's no way to build a community. And as Christians, that's what we're called to live in.
No, I appreciate that point very much, Julie, because I feel like any loving relationship is going to have conflict at some point. And if you're really close to that person, you can talk through it. If you're maybe not as close to that person, maybe you choose to just forgive them and let it go. But I thought it was interesting. I was kind of looking at different Bible passages, that I felt like might deal with conflict resolution. And I just really appreciated that in Luke 4, the disciples asked Jesus how they should pray. And Jesus says, okay, well, this is how you should pray. And so basically you start with honoring and praising the Lord. You ask for his will, his plans. You ask for strength for the day. And then boom, we ask for forgiveness first for ourselves. And then we ask that we can forgive others who have sinned against us. And then we ask, that God not lead us into temptation. And I thought that was so telling, such a bullet point to deal with every single day. And that when we pray, it includes us seeking forgiveness, that self-evaluation, humbling, being convicted, and then also that we can forgive other people. So obviously it's going to happen if Jesus is telling us this is how to pray.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's another thing the article pointed out was the danger of using these words too casually is that it doesn't allow for any introspection into like, well, what role do I play in causing this response or this behavior in another person, and not that you always have contributed. Like I said, there's real, there's real abuse where, again, we're not trying to minimize that, but it's probably always good to say what part, if any, did I play in that?
And I don't know about you guys, but anytime I get mad at someone, in my mind, it's all their fault. I mean, immediately. You could ask me and I'll tell you. It's all their fault. I did nothing wrong. And until I sit there and listen, and if I'm willing to listen, and I hear the words that they say to me about how they felt like it was all my fault. So then if there's that back and forth exchange, obviously, like I have been unaware or downplayed or minimized what I have done or how I was perceived or came across. And so until I'm willing to listen and hear that and kind of humble myself and maybe be quiet for a minute, I don't know, And so then like it's the things that are then revealed. I'm like, oh, I had no idea. I had no idea that's how I was coming across, or that when I said that, that's how you felt. And in respect, the person hopefully is doing the same with me and also evaluating themselves. But that's, again, healthy conflict if you can get there.
I was thinking about, we've talked before about friends and about how precious they are and how we're trying to make them and preserve them. And I know that we've talked a lot about like not cutting family off today. But what about, how has this played out in friendships? Have you ever had to have some hard conversations to preserve a friendship? Because I'm thinking back to like when I was growing up, and I don't know if I am normal or not, but I remember that, you had a friend group and there would be fights. Like you would fight amongst friends and like you'd be like, you'd have to have these long heart-to-hearts on the phone. They might take 45 minutes to an hour and hash out. I have never once done that as an adult had to have like this long hour like of hash to hash. So is it that I'm just better at friendships, or are people just dropping friendships and they don't care enough to have the heart to hearts? And I've left a string of offended people that never cared to talk it out, or what is it? Like, tell me about the friendship side.
Well, that's true. I don't do that. I mean, I don't do that with family much either. I'm not a confrontational person. I'm more of a absorb it, and I'm not saying that's healthy, but that's the way I do more. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so friendships, they do seem different. I guess I'm willing to accept more from other people than family.
Mm-hmm. When you say accept more, like you won't say
offenses.
Something. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're more tolerable from people that I am in a more casual relationship with than family,
Mm-hmm.
With friendships, it is harder. And as a child, yes, there was a lot of conflict happening. And I remember playing Barbies at my friend's house, and we had a conflict, and I'm pretty sure I yelled, "You're not my friend anymore." And I left and went home.
Yeah.
And then we're friends an hour later,
Right.
And so as an adult, I know that there have been certain times with people that out of nowhere, the Lord will convict me of something. And I have had to go to that person. Like, I have unrest until I go to that person and seek forgiveness. They've not said anything, but I have need to apologize. And then also, like, there's other times that I really spend a lot of time trying to evaluate, am I perceiving that they feel a certain way by a way they texted me? Am I reading into a situation because I wasn't invited? Am I feeling, so am I perceiving this, discord, or is it real? Is it an actual offense? And sometimes I have to talk out loud to Bryce about it, about certain things, situations. And I'm like, okay, tell me if I'm off base. I don't really know, because I'm not seeing the situation clearly. Is it real, or is it perceived? And so at that point, I'm still not saying anything, but I'm trying to figure out how to handle it. And most of the time it's just forgive them and let it go.
Yeah. Now, the article does say, of course, that there are times where friendships might need to end. I don't know if you guys have ever had that happen, but she said therapy speak, which is what we're talking about here, can simplify what should be a process of discernment and prayer about our own roles in a relationship into a black and white judgment that doesn't consider others' complexities, mistakes, and imperfections. Like, sometimes relationships should end, but just cutting them out should be done more thoughtfully and carefully. She went on to say, my mom remembers a conversation differently. She's gaslighting me and I won't speak with her anymore. Like, no, like, that shouldn't happen so quickly. Some introspection and
Yeah. I don't know if you guys have ever watched a TV show where they'll do the same scene between two people, but from each perspective, like within the drama. And that is always so interesting to me. Like, oh my goodness, the husband thought the way he says the story, the wife said this and with this tone. And yet when it's from the wife's perspective, she's like saying it nicer than she thinks. And she was, like, it's just people can be in the same situation and still see it two totally different ways.
Yes.
And I don't know if we always stop and remember that. Like, the person might not be lying. They maybe really did think that you said that. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Well, and you tend to always think you said everything in the best possible way, and they said it in the worst possible way.
That's right.
Like, oh, and then it's like, well, I hope, of course we don't want to be treated that way. We hope people will give us the benefit of the doubt. And so,
yeah.
Well, I do feel that in situations like this, we have an opportunity to love somebody. Sometimes people are going through things that we don't understand, and a person may be exhibiting emotions or a gruffness or a shortness because of what they're going through. And I think about driving in this instance. Sometimes you're cut off by somebody and you honk your horn and you're mad because, like, they almost hit you. Well, you don't know what that person's going through. And I always try to, like, now that I'm older and maybe my temper is not quite so triggered, I think, okay, I wonder what they're going through. Like, they could be on the phone with a teenager yelling, like, or being, who knows? Like, they could be rushing their kid to the hospital and they don't see you. And so that happens, that conflict happens. But sometimes we can just be a safe place for somebody. I know that when Bryce and I go to a restaurant, or I'm at a restaurant with kids and the waitress comes up and I can tell they're very flustered. They've got difficult customers at another table. They have a lot going on in their life. I've always seen that as an opportunity to say, hey, this is your safe table. Hey, this is like, we're easy, and then they take a breath. I can't tell you how many times this has happened with a waitress or a waiter that's very flustered that comes to the table. And it's a gift that they could treat me badly, but I know that I need to be a safe place for this person. Like, I can handle it. You know what I mean? And so sometimes you make a choice to be a safe place for somebody.
That's a really neat thing to give somebody, because I bet you just see their whole demeanor change.
Yeah, I can't tell you. I mean, I've had conversations afterwards. I've prayed with people afterwards by just giving them a safe table. Like, just take a breath, take a moment. We've had them sit down with us before. Like, just talk, you just never know what somebody's going through.
Yeah. Anytime we've ever asked a waiter if we could pray for them in any way, nobody has ever said no. And you might think, oh, they're at work. I don't even know if they're a believer, but they always have something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in the article, it says overusing therapy speak can keep us from hearing each other. It can also give us an excuse to stop listening altogether. It's hard to argue for reconciliation when a friend deems your relationship toxic or problematic. Those words shut down relationships. Like, some of this therapy speak, you think it's going to enlighten your relationships, but it actually cuts them off. Because what's someone supposed to do now if my friend says, well, you're toxic? Okay, now what am I going to do? Like, am I going to really pursue figuring out why they think that and like what the problem is? It sounds to me, in my mind, like they've basically said I'm poison to them. So get back and get out,
Yeah, why would they want to reconcile with a toxic person?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or if someone says, well, I'm sorry, you're crossing my emotional boundaries. And maybe I have crossed emotional boundaries. Is the person, I don't know, like, sometimes emotional boundaries, maybe you have to just cross them and go back and forth and talk about them. And, I don't know, work things out. If it's just, it can just be an excuse for shutting the whole conversation down, and then nothing gets better.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's just the easy way out.
And then also, I like that it says it's far easier to set an emotional boundary than to sacrifice for someone else, especially when it feels like they're annoying or unreasonable.
And, it talked about being in a hard relationship. And I thought, okay, what is a hard relationship? Marriage is a hard relationship. I think they meant like a relationship that is more difficult. But I think marriage in general should be classified as a hard relationship. And parenting is a hard relationship. And I've always said this, that if you will let it, it's not a given, but being in a relationship like that can make you a better person. Parenting for sure does. I mean, it immediately exposes all your selfishness, all your pride, all your anger, all your impatience, like things that you never thought about yourself. It all comes right out when you have to be face to face, against this other person who has those same basic impulses and feelings and stuff. So I think that if people were willing to stay in that, that's how they grow and improve and mature.
Right.
So it kind of seems like the noble thing to say, well, I can't be around you. It's not safe for me. But actually, I think it's just the opposite. If it's truly not an abusive situation, like working it out is what makes you better.
Yeah, I think nowadays there's an attitude that if you disagree with someone, then there's no reason for you to have a relationship. Like, you can have nothing in common. You can't have a conversation. You couldn't possibly do anything together. Abigail, we were talking about this morning. I was just trying to get ideas, and she was saying how it's not enough now. Like, you're not allowed to disagree quietly anymore. You can't disagree quietly on any issue. It used to be like, well, we have a difference of opinion, but we just don't really talk about that. But yeah, we still have all these other things. Now you're not allowed to do that. And in the article, it kind of says that. It says, unquestioning validation from those around us is what's needed now. It's not enough to disagree quietly. Now you can't disagree with me, and you also have to validate my position.
Yes.
So that's a difficult line, because you're not going to be able to validate every single person's position on every single thing in their life. And that doesn't mean that you can't have a relationship with somebody.
That's interesting, because I think that probably has come from the polarization of our society. Because if you say, like, well, I fall on this side of the political spectrum and you fall on this side, or a spiritual, I mean, whatever, it's almost like every other position they're going to fall under, because you can't be on one side on this issue and maybe on another issue be on this side. That doesn't seem like that happens much anymore. It's like, exactly where they're going to fall on every issue. And I think that's where there's no crossover. So it just seems like, oh, they're too far over here for me to even have a relationship with.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate this article that we've been referencing today. She said relationships then become dictatorships when one person ends up dictating what that relationship is, how you should feel about something. And if you don't feel the way that I feel, then you're cut off. And so I think that is the issue that we're trying to prevent with our conversation is, honestly, if both people in a relationship were both trying to be the dictator, there's no room. I mean, only one person's self can actually win, and you will become a very, very lonely person because there will be no room for anyone else, for any other opinions, for any other ideologies or thoughts. I mean, anytime you read a book, you learn somebody else's ideology. And I think that's a healthy way to constantly stay learning and talking to people. But if you're by yourself and you've decided what should be for every case, then there's just no room for anybody else in your life. And you're just choosing to be alone. And I don't want that.
Our favorite movie is That Thing You Do. And there's one of the quotes is, this guy says, I'm alone in my principles. You know, like he's going to drown himself. He's going to be alone in his principles. And that's really true sometimes, like you can create a lonely place. I think the article said, like, the example was, I don't like it when you do this. It offends me or hurts me. I need my space. That's the answer, is just to back off. Like, that's the only option, I thought this was interesting. We haven't mentioned this term yet, but gaslighting, I think, is such a funny term, because I read that it was the word of the year, Merriam-Webster's word of the year in 2022.
What?
I had to actually look up the definition, and I'm still not totally sure of it. Do you want to give what the definition is, Julie, or do you have it there?
There's actually an old movie called Gaslight that's kind of on this subject. And it's like this man basically tries to make his wife think she's going crazy, because he'll tell her something. And then later she'll say, well, don't you remember you said this? And he said, I never said that. So it's kind of trying to make someone believe something, kind of like they're going crazy.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not true.
It says that it's loosely defined as manipulating someone into questioning their own perception of reality.
Yeah.
Here's an example, like denying that an event took place, even if there's evidence to prove it, lying and contradicting what the victim knows to be true, making the victim feel like they're crazy or overreacting, making the victim doubt their memory and perception. There probably are some true psychopath gaslighters, but there's also just people remembering, or even just telling a lie. Maybe they're flat out lying. Like, I don't know if they're a perpetual gaslighter. I don't know.
They're probably a narcissist too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
very
one of the top
toxic
qualities of it. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Because the article said, oh, my mom remembered a conversation differently than I did, so she's gaslighting me. And I just laughed at that, because we talk about that all the time. They're like, Mom, don't you remember you told me this? And I'm like, no, I never said that. Or like, it could just be about like, oh, your aunt so-and-so had, did this or whatever. And they're like, no, you said that. And I'm like, no, I never said that. So I would be so guilty of gaslighting if that was, because they always give me a hard time.
I mean, all mothers are guilty, right? You have a toddler and they start throwing a fit over something. You're like, it's not that bad, You're like, stop your crying.
You're not even hurt.
And then the mom says these keywords, this is for your good.
Well, I don't know if we want to go into this. Like, did you see where it said another example of a therapy speak is self-care? And I thought, I don't even think I realized that it's just so ubiquitous now. I just didn't even think about it being a therapy word. But like, how could you push back against someone who maybe canceled plans for self-care? Like, how could you even push back on that? Like, you'd be doing them harm. Yeah. I thought that's interesting. That's kind of a fine line because
I haven't really run into this, but I was talking to one of my college-age daughters to see what she thought about all this. And I said, do people cancel plans for self-care? And she said, sometimes they do, she said, and sometimes people really do need a me night. But sometimes they cancel plans for self-care, but then they post about hanging out with someone else. And so is that really self-care? Like, I don't know. Like, that seems, and I've never had someone, I guess maybe our generation just doesn't label it as self-care. I'm sure people have like made up an excuse and backed out of things, but I've never had someone call me up and say, I'm canceling for self-care. But I do think that it maybe is a little bit more common amongst the younger generation.
Right.
Yeah. And I think it's just another way to kind of legitimize your action and even if it's to go out with somebody else, you've given it this very legitimate clinical reason. And how could you argue against that? So and it's also another way to avoid conflict.
Right.
Because you can't question it. Like, this is just easier than me explaining or getting out of or just going out with you.
Right.
Even though that wasn't my first choice or whatever,
Apparently, the original plans were toxic. So they needed to back off and go somewhere else that was safe. But I honestly cannot see any of my sons using this word. Seriously, none of self-care. I can't see any of my sons saying self-care. No. And I could see Abby using it, but in a safe place with me, like with an intimate conversation. Like, we would have an understanding, and I would be like, but at the same time, if you're feeling the need for self-care, I feel like it's even more of a loving response to just say, I just really need to stay home tonight, or, something like that. And so instead of putting the responsibility maybe on somebody else to accept your situation, that you're just honest about it. Like, I'm just tired. I'm stressed out. Things are going on or whatever. You don't even have to make the list. Just say, like, I just need to be home. And if you don't want to go, just say no. Like,
but do you think it's like if you said, oh, I just need to be home tonight, the person could say, no, I think you need to go out. Like, it'll be good for you. But if you said self-care, it seems more clinical. Like, like you're gonna shut down the conversation.
I mean, I could see that.
Yeah.
I mean, you could shut it down either way, but this is the surefire way.
Sure.
This is the quicker way.
I'm going to actually test out this word in my life over the next few days. I'm going to totally use this with my family. I'm just going to gauge reactions.
And we've had whole episodes on self-care. But I don't think that any of our suggestions for self-care have been cancel plans with your friend and just tell them self-care. I mean, you can do that. I mean, if Julie called me up and said, you know what, I just scheduled way too many things and I'm not going to be able to make dinner, make our plans for dinner, or if, whatever. I've had that happen on occasion, but this seemed more of like people just like lay that word down there and the other person is just supposed to accept the fact that, well, now you're not coming and I can't even get upset if this has happened multiple times. I can't even say, like, I don't think you're being a good friend because you cancel plans on me all the time because you've used the word self-care. So now I'm kind of stuck.
Yeah, I think it's to almost make it like at a medical level.
Right. Oh, right. Again, back to your diagnosis. I do appreciate that term. Like, have you been diagnosed with
Well, another example was someone saw on social media that a woman mentioned skipping a meal and she equated that with self-harm. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, if you have an eating disorder, yes. Mm-hmm. But if not, it's really just pretty benign and unfortunate. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I haven't seen those kind of things yet, but I'm sure teens probably see that more.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think one place I'd love for this conversation to go is one maybe helpful hint or practical suggestion for conflict resolution, whether family or friends. Something that I see is just like the magic glue also for my marriage. I've mentioned this before, is that if you do feel that you're in a conflict and you're not sure which way is up, just start praying for that person. And this could be with any relationship. This could be a very close relationship, like I mentioned, marriage, or it could be, a coworker. It could be somebody you just run into regularly that maybe you just feel like an unease about, or maybe you're constantly feeling offended by somebody. You see them maybe as a thorn in your side. I don't know. But really starting to pray for that person, allowing God to kind of intervene in your relationship, because I feel like I get a lot of clarity, conviction. I'm more self-aware as he, shows me kind of what I'm doing, maybe to promote that. But also how I can somehow get to better terms with this person. If there needs to be a healthy boundary kind of put in place, if I need to forgive them, like I just feel like the magic sauce is praying. Just literally being intentional about that particular relationship and seeking the Lord in it. And then let him show you and guide you through that, because he really will do that when you give it to him.
It's hard to pray for someone and be in conflict with them at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to just say, in my closing my part out, is in the article, I loved what it said at the end. It says, this is an opportunity for Christians to be countercultural, not by promoting unhealthy relationships. That's not what we're talking about. Not by closing down conversations about mental health or rejecting the insights that therapy does provide, but simply by trying to use our words more carefully and seeing people beyond the labels that we ascribe to them. And I thought that was a good conclusion to this article. Again, it's not shutting down talking about mental health and and real problems like that, but we can be more careful with labeling people.
Right.
All right, listeners, we'd love to know what you think on this topic. If you want to find us on Instagram, you can find us at Midlife Matters Podcast, or you can email us at midlifematterspodcast@gmail.com. But before we go, we want to do I'm a Fan. All right, Mindy, what are you a fan of this week?
All right, you guys are going to laugh, but you know how I love to go to sleep early at night. And also, I'm kind of a homebody with certain things. Well, Bryce and I actually went to a live concert last week, and it was later at night, and we knew we were going to stay out later. We were going to be with a bunch of people, and it was so fun. We went to see Kane Brown in concert while we were in Orlando. We had a blast. And so literally just seeing him in concert, I would rather just like watch big events on TV and be in the comfort of my own home and pause it and go to bed early, and then just watch the rest later. Like that's just kind of where I'm at. But choosing to kind of live a little, get out. And then I'm a huge Kane Brown fan now. Like he is awesome. I knew some of his music already, and then I didn't realize how much of his music I really did know. But it was just a lot of fun, and Bryce and I really enjoyed it. So I'm a huge fan.
Awesome. Good, Mindy. That sounds like a fun time.
Stayed up late and everything.
I know. Julie, what are you a fan of this week?
I'm a fan of some shorts that I found on Amazon, and they're kind of like Lulu lookalikes. And Mindy, I think you've bought this brand before. It's the CRZ Yoga. Haven't you mentioned that brand? Yeah. Well, these are the women's mid-waisted running shorts, liner, 5-inch, quick dry, zip pocket.
Wow, 5 inches and zip pocket. That's like my favorite.
Yes, and they come in 12 colors.
Wow.
Of course they do.
And so I have blue and kind of a light green and mint green, and they're only $28. And I love them. And I'm just not one to spend $100 on Lulu shorts. That's just not. I think the only time I've ever bought anything there was I had a gift card, and I only got like one thing with my gift card.
Okay.
So these are really, they wash well, they hold up well, comfortable, and very affordable.
Oh, wow. Please share that link. I'm so excited.
Okay. Good. Okay, I'm a fan of something very small, but I've used it a couple times in the past few weeks, and I forget how handy it is, like Stitch Witch or like the Heat and Bond hemming. And so I've had to hem a couple curtains, and this is so easy. It's basically just a roll of iron-on double-sided adhesive kind of tape that you fold it over where you want the hem, put that behind it, and iron. And so easy. I wouldn't use it for like pants probably, unless it was like an emergency, because I don't know how well it would hold up if you were washing them regularly. But it holds up great for curtains and things that you're really not going to be messing with that much. So anyways, just to bring to the forefront of your mind, Stitch Witch is out there. They have lots of different brands on Amazon. But anyways, that can make your life a lot more easy.
Yes, because hemming is the worst.
Yes. Well, this is great for curtains and everything.
Yeah.
So that is awesome.
I had a closet in my bonus room that doesn't have a door. It's kind of like a nook, but I didn't really want it just exposed all the time. I didn't want to have to pretty up the shelves. I wanted to put things in it. So I bought some curtains, cut them to the length I need, used a tension rod, and then just hemmed them with the Stitch Witch. And that was so easy. So
nice.
You can use it for a lot of different things. All right, you guys, I loved this discussion. Hopefully we brought up some things that people can give some thought to, and I know that I'll be thinking about this in the future.
Yeah, it's very good.
Good
very
discussion.
Good. All right, we'll talk to you later.
All right.
Sounds great.
Okay,
bye.
We're so happy you joined us today. You can find the show notes for this episode at midlifematterspodcast.com. Also, please tell a friend about the show and help them hit the free subscribe button on their favorite podcast app. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Midlife Matters Podcast. That's where we post pictures and stories about all the things we talk about in each episode. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.